what is fascia? Anybody?
I've read once, and I think that's an amazing way to explain it. It's the scaffolding of the body.
Exactly, yeah. So, anybody else? How do you see it?
It's like a web, a net that stretches throughout the entire body, surrounding all of the muscles and organs and bones, that creates a sort of structure that's been ignored for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's exactly that. But the other way of putting it is the fabric of life. So it makes you, and it's quite difficult to wrap your head around it, in as much as you say, well, it makes all of you, but it actually also makes scaffolding for every cell in your body. So it's not just every bit, so everything that's not a cell is fascia. So absolutely everything. So it's quite hard to kind of, and then you're like, well, but I'm not the same. Like, I'm not the same on the surface as I'm on the inside. How does that work? So if you think about fabrics by definition are made out of, what are the fabrics made out of?
Fibers.
Yay! The fibers. I think I've got one of my missing people coming in. Apologize. Could somebody get me to go mine?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So the fibers are collagen and elastin. So if you think of fibers in a fabric, a weave or a combination of fibers will determine how much give that fabric has. Yes? So those of you who genetically have more collagen, which generally makes tissue much stronger, more resilient, will be good at bodybuilding stuff and being strong, but won't be very flexible. Those of you who have more elastin kind of speaks for itself, then those of you who have more elastin, you'll probably find that you can be more flexible, but kind of lacking a bit in strength. And that's kind of the proportion of these things to fibers varies throughout the body depending on what's needed. So, the collagen elastin ratio in your tendons or your ligaments or around the tissues around your internal organs will vary depending on how much give you will need. And it makes sense. I mean, in some places the weave will be very messy, like in cotton wool. You can't really see it. Yeah, or felt. I didn't have any felt. But felt is generally how fascia kind of is in places. It doesn't have a specific net. The fascia that encases your muscles, it can start like felt if you don't train them. If you sit on the sofa watching Netflix all the time, it's a bit like this. It's like felt or like cotton wool. But if you start training it, if you start using it in a certain direction, then you develop this double lattice structure which has its own purpose, again, of having a give in certain direction, but not in other direction. Okay? That's quite important to understand because, especially with the double lattice build, because, remind me of that, I'll have to get there first. But partly because if I go to a certain point, there is a give, and then I go past it, what's going to happen? This kind of thing's going to happen. And then when repair starts to happen, you don't repair it like this. You repair it like cotton wool. And then you have to use it again in a certain way to rebuild all of this. And this happens during injuries. Most injuries are fascial injuries anyway, but it also happens during surgery and so on. So there's fibers, and there's also cells. Those cells are not fascial cells, they're made by other cells, but They're specifically, this is confusing part, so I'm not going to kind of go into that, but you can consider those cells like fibroblasts, etc. You don't have to worry about those, but they're the cells that build more of fascial fibers, or they degrade and eat away fascial fibers. And why is it important? It's important because these cells, they can be stimulated, and they're stimulated during stretching to a certain point. They're stimulated by certain chemicals in your blood, like you may have heard of nitric oxide and hydrogen sulfide, but it's just big words for chemicals that promote certain reaction. Oxytocin, if you ever had a baby, you'll know about oxytocin. So the chemicals in the body will stimulate these cells, as well as the stretching. For our purposes, stretching is important. So if I stretch something and I hold it for a while, these cells are gonna go, oh, and I think of them, so if I'm getting a bit too complicated, I think of these cells as slugs. So if you think of slugs, if you've seen slugs crawling around, they leave a trail. So it's the same kind of situation. You've got these little slugs crawling around and laying these fibers or these trails in the body that create a weave. Which then, if you don't use that weave stays like cotton wool. If you use it, it has then a nice lattice arrangement in your muscles specifically, or in other places in your body. So the third component is water, and it's bound and unbound water, and you don't need to know much more about that. And then there is this thing, mysterious thing, is known as ground substance. So what is ground substance? It's that glue-like, goo-like, snot-like. So there's all sorts of like complicated names ending in saccharides, and there are all sorts of forms of sugars, and they make this kind of, snot-like. There goes snot-like stuff that if you think of a fabric, if you imagine this in this, and kind of encased in snot, you get this kind of like, this kind of stuff. Yeah. So it makes it squishy. It makes it, it lubricates, it hydrates, it also provides a certain amount of support. And as you can imagine, you are not two-dimensional, three-dimensional, so you've got layers upon layers upon layers upon layers of stuff. What do you need between layers? What do you need between it? Glide, yeah, you need some form of, in certain places you need glide. We'll talk about glide later. So, it's got fibers, it's got cells that build fibers, and it's got the gooey stuff. It's got stuff that kind of keeps it sticky together, or doesn't keep it sticky together, gives it glide, nutrition, etc. So, in a kind of, there's a word for fascial property, which is viscosity. It's viscous. And people are like, ooh, what does that mean? So cornstarch experiment. How many of you done this before? Yeah, you've seen me do it probably if you've been here before. So you can play with this in the break. I think every time I do this, I end up like with cornstarch everywhere. So I'll open it anyway, and you can poke your fingers at your convenience, maybe in lunch break. So it looks liquid, yeah, until I apply force to it. So if I hit it, if I come in really quickly, if I impact it, it gets rock solid. And people are like, if I try to put my fingers in now and try to really forcefully remove it, it gets absolutely rock solid, but then I'll let go and it just drips through my fingers. So that's something you can play with. In the body, on impact, so when you jump, when something hits you, that part of fascia, the viscosity goes rock solid. So it's very much like, I do that, and it splatters and becomes, so from being liquid, this is not quite liquid, but if I splatter it, it just gets rock solid. Yeah, this is also stress relief. So, and you can train that, And it only happens at a really fast speed. So if it's really, really fast impact, so if you have a trigger point and you try and push on it really, really hard, really, really fast, that's what will happen. It will become, the place where you press it will become rock solid. Same the liquid in your joints, you know, when you jump, like I said, you try and catch a cricket ball. That's another good example. If you catch a cricket ball, all the liquid, this gooey stuff, gets solid so you can actually catch the ball. Otherwise the ball just breaks your fingers. Just gets through your hand at that speed. The other example, I think, if you kind of can't imagine it, is if you jump from a very high bridge into water, at the speed and the speed at which you hit the water makes the water rock solid. So that's how you injure yourself, I guess. Anyway, so play with this. I mean, I can demo, but we'll end up all over in cornstarch. But it's a really nice thing. However, if I come in really softly and I wait, so I meet it and I wait and I wait and I wait, you'll notice how quickly your fingers actually sink through. So for your body-wise, if you meet something at the resistance level, this is the MFR technique, really. You want to meet the body softly. So you don't go in and you press and you manipulate and you break. You try to come in and you wait, and you come in and you wait, and you come in and you wait, and so on. So this is viscosity. If I change the speed at which I'm working with my fascia, so if I slow down just a tad, just a little bit, so if I, instead of jumping and having high impact, if I just try and bounce, for example, you know, or do forward running, or if I, you know, remember the days when you did the ballistic stretching? We did this. No? Then it was knocked sideways and then it's back again, actually. So fascia is also elastic. Because of the fibers in there, it can also be elastic. So it can, if I stretch it, and it's about a second long kind of reaction, let go. It has this capacity to bounce back. So it happens a little bit slower than the kind of hardness that happens with viscosity, but it's still pretty fast. And it's something that you can train. So some people go, I don't feel elastic. You can train that with specific form of exercise, any kind of bouncy, trampoline, forefoot running, as I said, exercise. Why is it important? Is because elasticity is what gives you a bounce back, therefore keeps you young. So elasticity is a coefficient of youth. As I jokingly say, babies, when they fall down, they bounce back. Grandmas don't. So that's kind of like, this is my favorite kind of quotation. So some of the movements will use a little bit of elastic recoil, because elasticity gives this responsiveness to your body you're looking for. And so if I combine these two, if I combine elasticity with viscosity, if I combine this ability to be gooey and respond to pressure, and I combine this elasticity, ability to respond to this loading, I get what they call viscoelastic, or better word for it is plastic. So if I combine the two, I get this kind of quality that if I load it and I stretch it and I go slower, then it can start to change shape. And if I load it and it's relatively slow and I hold it, but it's only a short period of time, then when I let go, it slowly comes back to its original shape. If I load it and I sit here for a while, and please note I'm loading to a point of, so I feel the resistance and I stop. If I go further, I'll tear it. But if I load it and I wait, and I load it and I wait, and I load it and I wait, approximately 90 seconds to a minute, to 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, and then I keep repeating that on a regular basis. what I get is that that will not come back to its original shape, or it will take it a lot longer to come back to the original shape, which gives me another property of fascia, which is, so as well as being plastic, so it can change shape given time, it's also remodeling. So I can change the shape of this over time. So plasticity, this, is slower. I have to be slow, but remodeling takes even longer. So you actually can see it doesn't really spring back so easily. My daughter was heartbroken when I took this and said she can't eat it. So you can see it doesn't really come back very well to its original shape. Okay, so there is, why am I saying all these things? Because there is a relative obsession with, fascia has become a big word in fitness world. Yeah, and how would you define fitness? What's your definition of, because everybody is trying to be fit, so what's your definition of fitness? Like what? Everybody's
Exercise.
Okay. Yeah.
Quicker recovery time.
Mhm.
Ability to play and do what I want.
Yeah, so yeah, all of those things. And for me, kind of fitness, a nice definition of fitness is that you can respond to your environment in a creative way. So whenever there is a demand, you can respond to it in a way that doesn't break you. There are overlays of, in the 70s, everything was all about power. The stronger you were, the better. In the 80s, you had Jane Fonda, so cardiovascular fitness. And then in the 90s, it was all about core stability, so Pilates. And then in the teens now, in the early 2000s, we talk about fascia. So fascia became this big thing. And there is, for a while, there's been and still is, relative obsession with fascial release. As if somehow if I stretch more or loosen more or do something somewhere, that I'll be better off. But fascia, as you told me, is everything. It's absolutely everything in you. And so it has all of these capacities to respond to your environment, and all of them you can train. So you're actually using your fascia no matter what you're doing. Even sitting down now, you're still using and training your fascia. Whether you're sitting on the sofa, whether you're sitting on a bus, whether you're sitting in a car, whether you're walking, you're doing yoga, whether you're playing football, whether you whatever, you name it, all of that has effect on your fascia. So it's not that remodeling or plasticity or trying to reshape things is better than having an elastic ability, having ability to bounce back. It's just all those things is that's what your fascia does. It's not better or worse. And all of those things, the beauty of those things is that you can train them. And everything you know about muscles is wrong. Everything that you've been taught about muscles is wrong, in a sense that we say there's 600 muscles in the body, and then there is fascia. Well, actually there is one muscle in the body poured into 600 fascial pockets. And when you think about it like that, then you suddenly start to understand that, I better take care of my fascia. So the other thing I want to note and to bring in is how fascia transmits force then. How does that happen? Because although we talk about, everything is connected, some things are more connected than others. And fascia transmits force via what's known as tensegrity. So this is one thing I have forgotten, and I'll bring it in now. It sits here and forget it. So this concept of tensegrity was borrowed from architecture and design originally. and it's basically mutual, a combination of tension or integrity of tension and integrity, where parts don't really attach to each other. So you can see there's no contact between the wooden sticks, but they maintain integrity of shape through tension between them. It's like suspension bridge, I guess, if you think of. And so your body is very much like that. We were always taught mechanically, well, that attaches to that and pulls on that, there's levers. It doesn't really work like that in the body anymore. And it's really, again, that's another difficult thing to wrap your head around, because you always think of muscle attachments. And yes, you can still name muscles and should do, and I will do, but they're more like postcode areas on a map. So you call out the name and it's like, okay, you should feel that or work in that area. It doesn't mean that it's just isolated. Let's do a little example. So if you just stand up for a moment for me. Okay, and have your feet I don't know, hip width wider than hip width, just so that you feel steady on your feet. Okay, you don't have to like position them in a certain way. And then take your right arm in front of you. Yeah. So like you've got a mirror, you want to look at, let your elbow bend slightly so your shoulder can drop. And then if you're looking in the mirror, start to rotate your body. So take your mirror to the right. Yeah, and just keep going until you can't go anymore. Keep going. And then come back. Yeah. And then swap to the other side, just in case you think it's, well, you'll think it's a fluke. So let's do the left side. So go to left, keep going until you can't go anymore. And just pause there. Yeah, pause there. And notice that your left foot is now rolling out, so it's supinating. And your right foot is rolling in, or it's pronating. Yes? Come back. Take the right arm again. Okay, so your head is connected to your feet, but let's take this to the right again. What I want you to do is I want you to not move your feet. So rotate and stop your feet from doing what they did on the left. What happened? Come back. What happened?
Can't go quite as far.
Can't go quite as far. What else? Okay, let's try again. So left arm. Roll, let your feet, so go to the left. Let your feet do what they want to do. Yeah. How does this feel in your body? How does this feel overall? Feels easy, right? Give or take. Yeah? Yeah. Come back. Do the same on the other side, right? Now stop your feet going where they want to go. You can't go as far. How does that feel? Where? Yeah, where? Where do you feel it?
Shoulder.
So I'm feeling the shoulder. Anybody else?
Lower back.
Lower back, yes,
Yeah.
So you break the chain of transmission of force, and I'll talk about chains, but you have a whole body responding to movement because your feet are connected to your head. You break the chain, so something doesn't move in the chain, something else has to move more. For some of you, it was your shoulder. For some of you, it was your back. For some of you, it was your knees. Yes? So the force transmission is global, but global, some things, like I said, are relatively more connected than others, but essentially everything is connected. And if I load one part excessively, you can see everything else takes over to compensate. And if there's a weak link somewhere here, such as that broken chain of force transmission, then at some point it's going to cause me pain at best, or at some point it's going to break. And this is just a by the way, if you really want to see this, it's quite sort of beautiful and horrible at the same time. When you get an old video of Tiger Woods doing a swing, like 2000, early 2000s, doing a golf swing, and I can't do a golf swing because I don't play golf. But if you find a video and you slow it down, you can do this on the computer or your phone, and you slow it down. So he does a similar kind of thing. You have to rotate your body around to do a golf swing, and you watch him do it really slowly, and you notice one of his feet doesn't move, so as it should. It doesn't actually pronate. And so what happens is, you know what happens later on? He has back surgery. And so these are things that kind of long-term, why you want to work with fascia. You want to really start to connect the dots so the force transmission is better. So then there's no pain and there is no injury. Okay, you can sit down for a moment. What else do I need to say? So, just kind of a sum total why we should care. The other reason why we should care, apart from prevention of injuries and pain, is that your fascia is very rich sensory organ. It has more sensory neurons in it than in your eyes or in your tongue. So it's been recently named as your second nervous system. And so your brain, which is also made out of fascia, by the way, is constantly listening to what your fascia has to say, the rest of your body has to say about where you're in space, what kind of load is put on you, temperature, texture, etc. So there is this idea that your sixth sense that's where it comes from, your fascial sense. Most of the emotion or trauma, whatever you experience, is stored in fascia. And how does that happen? So, So you experiment, you know, whether you're as a child or as an adult, but let's say, you know, in your younger years, you experiment with movement. And it can be to adapt to your environment or to whatever's happening. You experiment with movement when you had an accident, you experiment with movement after surgery, okay? And that creates, so experiment with movement, and it creates what we would call gesture. So it becomes kind of repetitive. So you kind of found, oh, this works. This doesn't cause me pain anymore, or I can avoid other people if I do this. And then gesture, because it provides you that level of support, it becomes a habit. And then a habit, when repeated many, many times, just like I showed you with this thing, if I do the same thing over and over and over and again, it becomes then posture. So I carry myself in a certain way. I carry my body in a certain way. And posture long term, if I do it even longer, becomes structure. And so now I have, so you can see, you can make a cycle out of it. So now I have a structure. So say I've done this when I was 1, trying to learn to walk, to crawl, and I ended up with a structure. You know, this structure, however limited or not, I have to use again to experiment with movement. And it's already limited in how much I can do with it. And so I'm limited, but I create a specific gesture, then it becomes another habit, then it becomes a posture, and then it becomes a structure. And next time I experiment, and it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. So if you start unraveling that, if you start paying attention to your habits, experimenting in a different way, adding tools that we're going to use, then inevitably you're going to start to unravel the layers that go back to the reasons why you were trying to gesture in a specific way, which also will it will unravel the emotional reasons why you were doing that in the first place. And therefore, when we work today, a couple of points to make. One is fascia response on different time scale. And yes, you can get a very short-term, very quick response, but most of the time, if you are looking for shifts and changes, you're looking long-term project. So you're looking at 12 to 18 months. So as Tom would joke, he says that fascia is like a St. Bernard dog. It's really slow, but it's loyal. It will come to you eventually. And therefore, with regards to injuries and various other traumas, you have to be patient. You have to be patient. It's not going to happen in this class. And so don't orient yourself too much onto change. Everybody wants to get something. Like, you're here to get something out of it, whether I offer it to you or not. But don't orient so much towards change. Body can only take so much change at any given time. So don't try to get somewhere. Aim more for exploration, awareness. Okay? And then really just, I'll bring in mindfulness into this, but try to consider that because of long chains of transmission, where your pain may be is not necessarily where the problem is. Okay? And we are going to use movement, we're going to use balls, we're going to use breathing to work with all of this. Okay? So up there you see, I mean, these they just look good. But also they depict the meridians or these connections, or actually in movement they are known as slings, myofascial slings, and they are based on Tom Myers' Anatomy Trains structural integration, years of kind of experimentation, years of dissection. They do a dissection every year, twice a year sometimes, on a fresh cadaver. Sounds horrible, but and so all of these things are not just kind of made up stuff. And some of this I will mention for a reason. I don't really want to make it complicated, so you can look them up in the book if you're really interested in anatomy. But if not, it kind of gives you a good visual reference of what I'm talking about. I'm going to try not to use anything complicated as much as I can. And we'll see how I go and see if it's helpful to you. Okay? So shall we stand up again?